Donald Trump says that he plans to double tariffs on foreign steel from 25 to 50%. The president announced a new 50% tariff on foreign steel increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America. Trump says he plans to double steel aluminum tariffs to 50%. Trump's 50% steel tariffs are coming for your next fridge and dishwasher. Picture this one. White House stroke a 50% steel tariff, and billions go up in smoke overnight. Now Canada's waving the big red switch ready to cut. America's power. Could this be the moment the North American military supply chain snaps on May the 30th, 2025? President Donald Trump didn't just raise tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, he doubled them. 25 to 50%. Markets panicked. Defense steel stocks tanked, wiping out more than $6 billion in a single day. Ottawa called it a first strike and fired back. Nothing's off the table. Enter Ontario's Premier Doug Ford. His counterpunch, a 25% surcharge on every megawatt hour flowing to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York that hits 1.5 million U.S. homes bumps monthly bills by about $100 and sucks roughly $400,000 a day out of American wallets. Ford's message is crystal clear: back off or we kill the juice. Trump's tariff drops like a molten sledge onto already molten steel. Canada's power play is a finger on America's breaker box. When two economies this tangled turn trade weapons into energy weapons, the real question isn't who wins, it's whether NATO can react before assembly lines stall under soaring steel prices and soaring power bills. Markets barely had time to brace on 30. May 2025, President Trump signed an order that drastically increased tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, marking the steepest U.S. metal duty hike in decades. Retailers were the first to feel the jolt. Within 48 hours, the president publicly told Walmart to eat the tariffs instead of raising prices. A reprimand that landed on May 17th and has hovered over every earnings call since Walmart pushed back, warning that its razor thin margins can absorb only so much before everyday low prices disappear. The message to the rest of corporate: America could not be clearer. Don't pass the bill to voters, swallow it. Heavy industry is choking on that prescription. Caterpillars, bulldozers, and generators ride on thick steel plates. On 30th of April, the company told investors that tariffs will pile on up to $350 million in extra costs. This quarter, that single hit could erase nearly half of Caterpillar's projected free cash flow. Executives hinted at price hikes, but stopped short of specifics. Mindful that construction demand is already slowing, defense contractors have even less wiggle room. A Forbes breakdown estimates the 50% levy could add $5 billion to $8 billion to aerospace and defense programs over the next 2 years. Missile casings and fighter jet airframes would absorb the steepest markups. Pentagon officials privately concede that every percentage point uptick in raw material costs ripples through thousands of fixed-price contracts, forcing either schedule slips or emergency appropriations. Wall Street smells trouble. JP Morgan's economics desk. Citing the tariff shock and Canada's threatened power, surcharge raised its probability of a U.S. recession this year to 60%, up from 40% in March. Traders answered with 2 straight sell-offs, pushing the S&P Defense and Aerospace Index to its worst week since the pandemic. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, the fuse burns shorter. Ontario's 25% electricity surcharge now rides every watt flowing south to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. The added cost is already squeezing utilities and rateyers across the border. Premier Doug Ford warns he can escalate further. He is ready to flip the switch for good if Washington refuses to. Blink Steel Power and politics have fused into a live wire. Factories from Wisconsin to Quebec draw on the same grid and the same supply base. One question now overrides every quarterly forecast. How long can two interlocked economies weaponize each other's lifelines before something finally snaps? Ontario's counterstrike isn't just ink on a press release. Since 10th of March 2025, the province has slapped a 25% export penalty, about 10 Canadian dollars or $7 US per megawatt hour, on every watt flowing south to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. The fee already pulls in 300,000 to 400,000 Canadian dollars a day, billed to US ratepayers. Not Canadians. NEWSO's books show the stakes its intertie can draw up to 2,500 megawatt from Ontario. And in 2024, New York imported 7.7 terawatt hours of Canadian power, more than any other state at peak. The surcharge tax on roughly 17,500 each hour atop city budgets feel long before August heat arrives Minnesota and Michigan by less yet. Utility dive pegs the three-state hit at 28,000 to 278,000 daily, equal to the monthly bills of about 2,000 Midwestern homes. Trump vows to double down. Ford replies he will flip the switch and halt exports. Ontario's grid agency has run the drill. Losing the New York line, a safety valve equal to 2 nuclear reactors during a summer spike, would force industrial load shedding, pausing presses that stamp tank tracks and missile fins. That is Ford's leverage. Trump can tax. Metal Ontario can tax time every idle hour, nudges the US defense supply chain closer to chaos. With summer demand weeks away, Washington must decide if it will gamble on a blackout it can neither price nor predict. Ontario has moved from talk to takedown on 3F25. Premier Doug Ford ordered every bottle of American whiskey, bourbon, and craft beer cleared from the shelves of the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. The Reuters headline was blunt: Canadians cancel trips, ban American booze after Trump's tariffs. The symbolism landed. First revenue followed. LCBO's annual sales of U.S. alcohol topped 1 billion Canadian dollars, removing those labels overnight, redirected a flood of dollars to Canadian distillers. Kentucky exporters scrambled for new outlets. Ford then turned procurement into a pressure point. By 10th of February, the province had cancelled a planned 100 million Canadian dollars broadband contract with a California satellite firm and froze bids from all US tech suppliers. Local media called it Ontario's largest single contract ever scrapped. For political reasons, the message was clear: no business as usual, while Washington keeps the steel hammer raised. Ottawa doubled the velocity. On the 12th of March 2025, Finance Minister Jean-Yves Leblanc unveiled a mirror image retaliation package. The plan slapped 25% duties on $30 billion Canadian, about 21 billion US of American goods. It took effect the same week Trump's metal tariffs kicked in. Another 125 billion Canadian dollars could follow within 21 days. If the White House refuses to negotiate. The list spans 1,156 items. Florida orange juice, Wisconsin lawnmower engines, even California diapers are now tagged "pay extra" at Canadian customs. A March 31st Reuters survey found US consumer goods suppliers already reporting cancelled Canadian orders as retailers pivot to homegrown brands. Each strike seems small: a bottle here, a tech contract there. Together, they form a lattice of non-tariff tripwires designed to bleed leverage from US boardrooms faster than any customs form in 40 days. Canada has rewritten the playbook: weaponize procurement rules, weaponize consumer taste, and leave Washington guessing which revenue stream will dry up. Next, the booze bans and procurement blacklists are dramatic, but Canada's bigger vulnerability may be political. Ottawa and Ontario are now speaking two very different languages at the same negotiating table. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has chosen a frost-edged, rules-based track on 5th of March 2025. His trade ministry filed a formal request for consultations at the World Trade Organization. The filing brands: Washington's 50% steel tariff. Unjustified: Ottawa vows to fight through the WTO's dispute settlement body and the USMCA panel system. The filing gives both capitals 60 days to talk before Canada can demand a binding ruling in the same press scrum. Trudeau branded the tariff at very dumb, but stressed that retaliation had to be measured, and multilateral Ontario Premier Doug Ford rejected the federal approach, warning that Canada is being steamrolled by Trump while Prime Minister Carney delays retaliation. He instead called for a swift and forceful response, emphasizing that hesitation would only embolden Washington and risk further economic damage to Canadian industries. Ford even dangled the idea of taxing or outright cutting the electricity. Ontario sells to 1.5 million American customers, bluntly saying there will be zero concessions while our steel and our power are chained. That rupture hands the White House a wedge. US trade lawyers already hint they could carve Ontario's threats out of any settlement by labelling them provincial measures beyond Ottawa's remit. If Washington succeeds, the federal case plows through Geneva, while Ford's hard-ball tactics stay in limbo, splitting Canadian leverage in half. Senior officials in Toronto privately admit the scenario looks like shooting ourselves in the foot, a disunited front. Lets us negotiators run out the WTO clock, often 2 years or more, while tariffs bite immediately. For American strategists, the divide is a gift they can praise Trudeau's responsible process in public court forward, behind closed doors, and play the two off each other for exemptions. Sector by sector each day, the split persists. Midwestern factories keep their Canadian power, and Washington keeps its 50% steel shield. Canada's real test now is not legal or economic. It is political cohesion, unless Ottawa and Queen's Park merge their five. Playbooks fast. The next round of talks may feature 3 teams at the table. The United States would sit comfortably in the referee's chair. Tariffs do not just burden accounts, they ricochet through every rivet and invoice that keeps the continent's factories humming. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer captured that reality on the 15th of January 2025. She warned that some auto parts cross the border a couple of times throughout production, so every new levy shows up in the final sticker price. That border shuffle forms the backbone of what economists call North America's twin-track supply chain. A brake caliper cast in Windsor may head to Detroit for machining, return to Ontario for coding, then travel back once more to join a completed Dodge Ram. The volumes are colossal statistics. Canada reports that motor vehicles and parts generated 83 billion Canadians in export revenue last year, and a stunning 94% of that haul went straight to the United States in value terms. The sector HS near 1/4 of everything Canada sells south of the border, which means any disruption, be it a steel surcharge or a blackout in Ontario, hits both sides of the Great Lakes like a dropped engine block. Now the twin tracks are buckling. Washington's steel duty inflates the raw metal cost embedded in each chassis rail. Ontario's power surcharge threatens to jack up assembly line utility bills. Just as summer demand peaks, the Alliance for Automotive Innovation sharpened the numbers on the 22nd of April 2025, telling US regulators that fresh parts tariffs would scramble the global automotive supply chain and feed directly into higher showroom prices. Canada does not escape unharmed. The same steel bottleneck that lifts US price tags threatens Canadian jobs when specialty grades, especially the lighter alloys used in EV battery casings, run short. Consultancy Wood Mackenzie estimates domestic mills would need at least 18 months to backfill the gap, a delay that could idle shifts in Windsor and Oshawa long before a single new blast furnace lights up in Pittsburgh. What emerges is a lose-lose spiral. Cars assembled in Alabama grow more expensive, yet layoffs creep north of the border, and neither outcome guarantees fresh American steel capacity. Tariffs were sold as leverage. But the vice is now squeezing both sides at once, and the thread holding the crossbar supply chain together is starting to creak. Prime Minister Mark Carney is positioning Canada as a future energy superpower. In early June 2025, he joined provincial premiers in Saskatoon to endorse a national plan that would fast-track infrastructure approvals and shift energy exports beyond the US. Bloomberg's cameras caught the headline, "Pledge a 22 to 30 billion Canadian infrastructure surge." The money links three mega projects, a deep water expansion at Prince Rupert, a cross-Canada high-voltage backbone, and a hydrogen plus battery corridor stretching from Alberta to Nova Scotia. Money is only the first pillar. The second is time. Carney's plan creates a single major project office that applies a one project, one review rule and caps federal permitting at 24 months. Industry groups say that could cut today's average approval cycle by almost 4 years, eliminating the regulatory limbo that has stalled previous pipelines and wind farms. World Nuclear News notes that provincial premier endorsed the 2-year limit at a Saskatoon summit on June 2nd, framing it as Canada's best shot at catching up to US fast-track rules. Scale and speed set the stage for the third pillar market shift. Right now, 90% of Canada's energy exports flow south. Carney wants at least 1/3 of future barrels electrons and ammonia molecules sailing west across the Pacific or east across the Atlantic. By 2030, Alberta is already drafting a 1 million barrel per day pipeline aimed at Prince Rupert to feed Asian refineries, a project Reuters values at up to $20 billion US. If the math holds, Prince Rupert's new berths will move more oil than the Trans Mountain expansion by 2028, while the coast-to-coast supergrid soaks up surplus hydro from Quebec and surplus gas peaker power from Saskatchewan. Green hydrogen plants dotted along that spine would plug into Carney's 5 billion Canadian Clean Tech Fund, producing export-grade ammonia for Japan and the EU. Critics call the blueprint de-Americanization dressed in green, but supporters counter that diversification beats dependence. Either way, the strategy rewires the tariff debate. Washington can tax steel today, yet Carney is laying track for tomorrow's cargo, critical minerals, electrons, and liquid hydrogen heading everywhere except the United States. For a supply chain already fraying over power surcharges and metal levies, that routing may prove the most disruptive cut of all. Public patience is fraying faster than any steel tariff can be rolled back on the 14th March 2025. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index sank to 57.9. A 2-year low. Survey director Joanne Shu blamed broad tariffs fueling trade war fears, noting that uncertainty over metal duties already chills big-ticket purchases in factory towns. Music. The backlash is loudest around the Great Lakes, where the nation's cars, tanks and turbines are built. Governors Gretchen Whitmer, Tim Walz and Tony Evers met in Chicago on April 11th, expressed concern to the White House over how cross-border tariffs could hurt families on both sides of the border. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer cautioned that the new tariffs would disrupt supply chains, raise vehicle prices, and cut jobs on both sides of the border, her staff say. She repeated that plea inside the Oval Office, pressing Trump to stop using the Great Lakes as a bargaining chip. Gallup's 28th of April national poll shows 66% of adults expect tariffs to raise prices, while only 49% see any job gains. A recent Detroit Regional Chamber poll found that 51% of Michigan voters believe Canadian tariffs will negatively impact the state's economy, highlighting growing local anxiety over the cross-border trade war. Each percentage point of disapproval equals thousands of swing state voters who could turn sharper still if summer power bills spike while auto plant shifts shrink on April the 23rd. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called the tariffs totally avoidable, warning they were already hurting farmers, businesses, and consumers. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker added on 2 June that the levies had stripped $500 million from state revenue staffers. In both capitals, confirm contingency plans, fuel subsidies, and cross-border power sharing pacts are on paper should Ontario pull the plug with every poll point that slips and every governor who speaks up Washington's room to ignore public sentiment contracts electoral math, not WTO timetables may decide when negotiators finally return to the table. Washington's next gambit is already on the table. On the 9th of April 2025, US officials told Reuters they are weighing a narrow national security waiver that would let defense contractors import Canadian steel duty-free if no homegrown substitute exists. Ottawa is counter-programming with voltage, not Metal Ontario's 25% export fee about 10. Canadian dollars $7 US per megawatt hour has applied to every watt flowing south since March 10th. Reuters calculates the charge earns